I still get chills thinking about that moment when my 17-year-old sister Camille stood up in front of 300 people at the National Robotics Championship and said the words that would change everything. "I'll compete blindfolded." The entire convention center went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. The judges thought it was some kind of publicity stunt. MIT's team captain actually started laughing, but I knew something they didn't. I'd watched Camille work magic with her hands in our dad's garage for years, building robots from spare car parts while other kids were playing video games. What happened next would make grown engineers question everything they thought they knew about talent, determination, and what it really means to understand your machine. Let me tell you about my sister Camille. At 17, she's already a robotics prodigy who's been building machines since she was 8 years old. I'm her older brother, 19, studying engineering in college, and I've been her biggest supporter through everything. Our dad, Robert, used to be a mechanic before becoming a high school shop teacher, and he's the one who first put tools in Camille's hands. Our mom, Diana, works as an insurance adjuster and has always been the practical voice in our family, though she's fiercely protective of both of us when it matters. Picture this scene. My sister sitting at a workbench with a black blindfold covering her eyes, her fingers moving across robot components with surgical precision. Around her, MIT students are watching in complete silence, their expensive equipment forgotten, as this teenager from Toledo, Ohio, does something they never thought possible. Her hands dance across circuits and gears like she's reading Braille, making adjustments that would challenge engineers with decades of experience. That image still gives me goosebumps because I know how we got there. It wasn't luck. It wasn't some feel-good movie moment. It was years of preparation, heartbreak, and a sister who refused to let anyone else define her limits. What you're about to hear is the true story of how Camille went from being mocked and dismissed to defeating one of the most prestigious robotics teams in the country while wearing a blindfold. To understand what happened at that robotics championship, you need to know who Camille really is and how she got there. This story starts 9 years ago in our dad's garage in Toledo, Ohio, when Camille was just 8 years old. Dad had been working on an old Chevy transmission when Camille wandered over with her curious eyes and tiny hands. She'd always been drawn to mechanical things, taking apart alarm clocks and radios just to see how they worked. That day, she picked up a wrench and started helping Dad remove bolts with surprising precision for someone so young. "This kid's got magic hands," Dad told Mom that night over dinner. But everything changed 6 months later during one of Dad's welding projects. Camille was watching from what we thought was a safe distance when a piece of hot metal sparked off and caught her left eye. The emergency room doctors did everything they could, but she lost most of her vision in that eye. For weeks, Camille stayed in her room, refusing to go near Dad's garage. Mom blamed herself for letting her hang around dangerous tools, and Dad was heartbroken, thinking he'd ruined his daughter's future. The turning point came when Camille finally returned to the garage, but this time something was different. Without full sight, she started relying on her sense of touch, sound, and spatial awareness in ways that amazed all of us. She could identify screws by feeling their thread patterns, diagnose engine problems by listening to subtle sound changes, and assemble complex mechanisms with her eyes closed. Dad started saying, "Camille, your hands see better than most people's eyes." And he wasn't exaggerating. By age 12, Camille was building her first robots from spare car parts, old computer components, and whatever electronics she could salvage from garage sales. While other kids were playing with store-bought toys, she was creating walking, talking, problem-solving machines in our garage. Her first robot looked like a pile of junk held together with duct tape and determination, but it could navigate our house, respond to voice commands, and even help Mom find her lost car keys. High school brought new challenges. While Camille excelled in her robotics classes, Mom constantly worried about her future. "Honey, maybe you should focus on something more practical," Mom would say during our family dinners. "What if the robotics thing doesn't work out?" But Dad always backed Camille up. "Diana, our daughter has a gift. We need to help her use it." Camille proved her abilities by winning 3 regional robotics competitions during her sophomore and junior years. Each victory brought more confidence, but also more pressure. She knew that colleges were watching, especially MIT, her dream school. The problem was money. Even with her competition wins, we were still a working-class family from Ohio. Dad's teacher salary and Mom's insurance job weren't going to cover MIT's tuition without significant scholarship help. This senior year represented Camille's last shot. The National Robotics Championship was her chance to prove she belonged among the best young engineers in the country. We'd scraped together money for the trip to Chicago, with Mom working extra shifts and Dad selling some of his vintage tools to cover expenses. Camille had spent the entire school year preparing, often working until 2 in the morning in Dad's garage, fine-tuning her robot and perfecting her programming. Her robot wasn't pretty by conventional standards. Built from salvaged parts and held together with creative engineering solutions, it looked rough compared to the sleek, expensive machines other teams would bring. But Camille knew every bolt, every wire, every line of code in that machine. She could troubleshoot problems by sound alone and make adjustments that would stump engineers with decades of experience. The night before we left for Chicago, I found Camille in the garage running her hands over her robot one final time. "You nervous?" I asked. She looked up at me with that determined expression I'd seen so many times before. "Terrified," she admitted, "but also ready. This robot and I have been through everything together. We understand each other in ways that can't be programmed or bought." That's the Camille who walked into the National Robotics Championship, carrying her robot in a modified toolbox, ready to compete against teams with unlimited budgets and years of preparation. She wasn't just representing herself that day. She was representing everyone who'd ever been underestimated, everyone who'd been told their dreams were too big for their circumstances. Walking into the McCormick Place Convention Center in Chicago felt like entering a different world. The massive space buzzed with activity as hundreds of students wheeled around robots that looked like they belonged in science fiction movies. Teams wore matching uniforms with their school logos embroidered in gold thread, and their equipment cases had custom foam cutouts for every component. We looked around at the sea of preparation and money on display, and I could see Camille's confidence waver for the first time. MIT team stood out even among the elite competition. 5 students dressed in matching navy blazers clustered around a sleek silver robot that looked more like a luxury car than a machine built by teenagers. Their team captain, Braxton, was a tall guy with perfectly styled hair who carried himself like he already knew he'd won. His teammate Tessa had the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no, gesturing animatedly while explaining their robot's artificial intelligence features to a gathering crowd of impressed competitors. Camille set her modified toolbox down at our assigned station, and I watched her carefully unpack her robot. Compared to the polished machines around us, hers looked rough and homemade. The metal frame showed tool marks from Dad's garage, and several joints were reinforced with what was clearly repurposed automotive parts. But I knew what others didn't. Every modification had a purpose. Every seemingly crude solution solved a complex engineering problem. That quote S when Braxton noticed us. He strolled over with his signature smirk, looking Camille up and down like she was lost. Did someone's little sister get lost? The junior division is downstairs. His teammates followed behind him, barely suppressing their laughter. Tessa examined Camille's robot with theatrical horror. Is that robot held together with duct tape? How quaint. Judge Patricia Hernandez, a stern woman with silver hair and thick-rimmed glasses, approached our station for the mandatory equipment inspection. She took one look at Camille's age and her unconventional robot and sighed audibly. "Honey, are you sure you're in the right competition? This is the advanced division." When Camille assured her she belonged there, Judge Hernandez shrugged and made a few check marks on her clipboard without really examining the robot's capabilities. The mockery escalated during the practice rounds. Other teams gathered to watch Camille's robot navigate the test course, and their reactions ranged from condescending laughter to outright disbelief. "Did they really let high school kids into nationals this year?" Someone whispered loud enough for Camille to hear. Another competitor joked about charity cases getting participation trophies. But then something interesting happened during the preliminary scoring. Camille's robot didn't just complete the practice course, it excelled. Her machine moved with precision and efficiency that surprised even the judges. While other robots stumbled through complex manipulations or got confused by sensor data, Camille's straightforward design tackled every challenge with elegant simplicity. Braxton, quote, "S amusement quickly turned to irritation." During lunch break, he made sure his voice carried across the cafeteria when he said, "We've been preparing for this for 3 years with $50,000 in funding and MIT's engineering resources. This should be interesting." His tone made it clear he thought Camille's early success was pure luck. The tension reached its breaking point during the afternoon briefing when judges explained the final challenge. An incredibly complex obstacle, course requiring robots to navigate tight spaces, manipulate delicate objects, and solve puzzles under time pressure. When Camille's preliminary scores put her in the top 3, Braxton's facade finally cracked. "Lucky break," Tessa muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. "Wait until the real challenge begins." But Braxton went further. He stood up in front of the entire assembly and projected his voice so everyone could hear. "I bet she couldn't even complete the course with her eyes closed. Her robot's probably doing all the work anyway." The comment hit exactly where he intended it to. Camille's partial blindness had always been her deepest insecurity, the thing she worked hardest to overcome. Judge Patricia actually chuckled at Braxton's comment. "Well, that would certainly level the playing field, wouldn't it?" I watched Camille's face cycle through emotions: embarrassment, anger, hurt, and then something else entirely. Something that made me nervous. She stood up slowly, her hands steady despite what I knew was a racing heart. Her voice carried across the suddenly quiet room with crystalline clarity. "You know what? I'll take that bet." The entire convention center went silent. Even the background noise of machinery and conversation seemed to stop. Braxton's confident smirk faltered. "You're not serious?" Camille looked him directly in the eyes. "Dead serious. I'll compete the final round blindfolded. When I win, I want a public apology and your team's endorsement for my MIT application." In that moment, I realized my little sister wasn't the same person who'd walked into that convention center that morning. She'd been pushed too far, and now she was ready to push back. The silence that followed Camille's challenge felt like it lasted forever. 300 people stared at my 17-year-old sister, who had just volunteered to compete blindfolded against one of the most prestigious robotics teams in the country. I could see the shock on every face in that convention center, but none more surprised than Braxton's. His confident smirk had vanished completely. "You can't be serious," he said, but his voice cracked slightly. The cocky MIT captain, who'd been mocking Camille all day, suddenly looked unsure of himself. Tessa whispered something urgent in his ear, probably telling him to back down, but pride wouldn't let him retreat now. Not in front of everyone. Judge Patricia stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable with the situation spiraling beyond her control. "This is highly irregular," she announced to the crowd. "The competition has strict safety protocols." But Camille cut her off politely but firmly. "Ma'am, I'm not asking to modify the rules or equipment. I'm simply choosing to compete with a handicap. If both teams agree, I don't see why that would violate any protocols." The crowd began murmuring, and I could see people pulling out phones to record what was happening. Word was spreading through the convention center like wildfire. This wasn't just a competition anymore. It had become something much bigger. Dad appeared at my side, having pushed through the crowd when he heard the commotion. He pulled Camille aside, away from the cameras and curious onlookers. "Sweetheart, you don't have to prove anything to these people," he said quietly, his voice filled with concern. "You've already shown everyone what you're capable of." But Camille shook her head. "No, Dad, this isn't about them anymore. It's about showing everyone what's possible when you truly understand your machine." She looked back at Braxton, who was huddled with his teammates, clearly debating whether to accept the challenge. "I've spent 9 years learning to see with my hands. This is what all that practice was for." I wanted to tell her to stop, that she'd already proven herself, that this was too risky. But looking at her face, I realized something important. This wasn't an impulsive decision driven by anger or wounded pride. This was Camille stepping into who she was meant to be. She'd been preparing for this moment her entire life, even if she hadn't known it. Mom arrived just as Camille was explaining her decision to Dad. I watched Mom's face cycle through emotions: fear, pride, worry, and finally, understanding. "I always underestimated you," Mom said, tears welling up in her eyes. "Show them what Toledo girls are made of." Camille spent the next hour in what I can only describe as meditation-like preparation. She sat cross-legged on the floor next to her robot, running her hands over every component with the reverence of a master pianist checking her instrument before a concert. Her fingers traced wires, tested joint movements, and checked sensor alignments with movements so precise they looked choreographed. "I know every screw, every wire, every sound my robot makes," she explained to me as she worked. "When it moves left, I can feel the slight vibration in the frame. When it encounters resistance, the motor pitch changes by half a tone. I don't need my eyes because I have something better. I have complete understanding." Other competitors had stopped their own preparations to watch Camille work. Even some of MIT's team members seemed fascinated by her methodical, tactile approach to robotics. She was doing something none of them had ever seen, treating her robot not as a sophisticated tool, but as a partner she could communicate with through touch and sound. Braxton finally approached our station, his earlier bravado replaced by something that looked almost like respect. "If we're doing this," he said quietly, "I want it on record that I tried to talk you out of it. This isn't some publicity stunt. The final course is incredibly difficult. Teams with full sight and years of preparation struggle with it." Camille looked up at him with calm determination. "I appreciate the concern, but I'm not changing my mind. When I win, I still want that apology and your endorsement." She paused, then added something that surprised everyone. "And when I win, I want you to really look at how I did it, because there's something important here that goes beyond just this competition." As Judge Patricia prepared to make the official announcement about the modified final round, I realized that Camille had transformed this from a story about overcoming mockery into something much more profound, a demonstration of what becomes possible when you develop true mastery of your craft. She wasn't just competing blindfolded to prove a point. She was about to show everyone a completely different way of thinking about engineering, intuition, and the relationship between human and machine. Judge Patricia's hands trembled slightly as she secured the black cloth over Camille's eyes. The entire convention center had gone quiet, except for the hum of air conditioning and the occasional camera click. 300 people held their collective breath as my sister stood there, looking smaller than ever, but radiating a confidence I'd never seen before. MIT quote, S-team made final adjustments to their sophisticated robot, while Camille simply placed her hands on her machine and closed her eyes beneath the blindfold. "Ready when you are," she said softly. And I swear I could hear her heartbeat from 10 feet away. Braxton looked nervous now, which surprised me. This should have been the easiest victory of his life. But something about Camille's calm certainty was clearly unsettling him. "This is almost too easy," he muttered to Tessa, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. Poor girl doesn't know what she's gotten herself into. The final course was a nightmare of engineering challenges. Robots had to navigate through a maze of obstacles, manipulate delicate objects without damaging them, solve sequential puzzles, and complete precision tasks that would challenge even experienced engineers. The time limit was 30 minutes, and most teams barely finished within the deadline. When Judge Patricia signaled the start, MIT's robot immediately began its programmed sequence. Their machine moved with mechanical precision, its sensors scanning and calculating optimal paths, while its AI algorithms processed data in real time. It was impressive to watch, like seeing the future of robotics in action. But then I looked at Camille, and what I saw took my breath away. She wasn't just controlling her robot, she was dancing with it. Her hands moved across the control interface with fluid grace, making micro-adjustments based on sounds and vibrations that no one else could detect. When her robot encountered the first obstacle, she tilted her head slightly, listening to the motor's pitch change, then made a correction, so subtle I almost missed it. "Come on, partner," she whispered to her robot. Let's show them what we can do." The crowd began to murmur as Camille's robot navigated the course with unexpected elegance. Where MIT's machine calculated and processed, hers seemed to flow. When MIT's robot reached the precision manipulation task, requiring the delicate placement of fragile components, their expensive sensors struggled with the fine motor control needed. Camille's robot glided through the same task effortlessly. "How is she doing that?" one of MIT's team members asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. Even Braxton had stopped watching his own robot to stare at Camille in disbelief. The moment that changed everything came at the puzzle sequence. MIT's robot got stuck on a complex logic problem, its AI algorithms cycling through possibilities, while precious seconds ticked away. Meanwhile, Camille's robot approached the same puzzle and solved it in half the time. "Sometimes the simplest solution is the most elegant one," Camille said, and I realized she was talking to the entire room. Not just her robot. Judge Patricia moved closer to Camille, her professional skepticism giving way to genuine amazement. "I've never seen anything like this," she whispered to another judge. "She's not just operating that machine, she's having a conversation with it." With 5 minutes remaining, both robots approached the final challenge, a complex assembly task that required perfect timing and coordination. MIT's robot, despite its advanced programming, began to struggle with the intricate movements required. When Camille did something that made everyone in that convention center question everything they thought they knew about robotics. She removed her hands from the controls entirely and simply listened. For 30 seconds, she stood perfectly still, head tilted, as if she was hearing something the rest of us couldn't. Then her hands returned to the controls, and her robot executed the final sequence with breathtaking precision. Every movement was perfect, every timing exact. It completed the assembly task and crossed the finish line a full 30 seconds before MIT's robot. When the timer stopped, the silence was deafening. Then someone started clapping, and within seconds the entire convention center erupted in applause. Camille reached up and removed her blindfold, revealing tears streaming down her face. Braxton stood frozen, staring at the scoreboard that showed Camille's time. "That's impossible," he said, his voice barely audible above the cheering crowd. "How did you do that?" Camille wiped her eyes and looked at him with something that might have been compassion. "I didn't just build this robot, Braxton. I understand it. Every vibration, every sound, every hesitation tells me what it needs. You can program artificial intelligence, but you can't program intuition." The crowd surged forward, everyone wanting to congratulate the girl who had just redefined what they thought was possible. But all I could see was my sister, standing there, with quiet dignity, having just proven that the most sophisticated technology in the world was no match for genuine understanding and years of dedicated practice. The applause seemed to go on forever, but what happened next changed not just Camille's life, but how everyone in that convention center thought about engineering itself. Judge Patricia pushed through the crowd, her stern expression completely transformed. She'd been judging robotics competitions for 20 years, but I could see in her eyes that she'd just witnessed something unprecedented. "In all my years of competition judging," she announced to the crowd, "I have never seen such an extraordinary demonstration of engineering intuition. What we just witnessed wasn't just a victory, it was a masterclass in the relationship between human understanding and machine capability." Braxton approached our station slowly, his earlier arrogance replaced by genuine humility. The transformation in his demeanor was remarkable. "Camille, I owe you more than an apology," he said, his voice carrying across the now quiet space. "I was wrong about you, about your abilities, and about what real engineering excellence looks like." He paused, looking directly at her. "I meant what I said about the MIT endorsement. You belong there more than any of us." But the biggest surprise came from Tessa, who had been one of Camille's harshest critics. She stepped forward with tears in her eyes. "Would you teach us some of your techniques? Our robot has every technological advantage possible, but what you just demonstrated is something that can't be programmed or bought." Before Camille could respond, a woman in a professional suit approached our station. "Miss Camille, I'm Dr. Rebecca Chang from MIT's Advanced Robotics program, she said. I drove down from Boston specifically to see this competition, and I'm very glad I did. She handed Camille a business card. We need to talk immediately about a full scholarship offer, but more importantly, about how your approach could revolutionize how we teach robotics engineering. Within minutes, representatives from 3 other prestigious universities had approached with similar offers. Carnegie Mellon, Stanford, and Georgia Tech all wanted to discuss scholarship opportunities. But I could see that Camille was overwhelmed by the sudden attention, and Dad stepped in to help manage the chaos. The real moment of triumph came when our family finally had a quiet moment together. Mom pulled Camille into a fierce hug, crying openly. "I'm sorry I ever doubted your dreams," she whispered. "I was so focused on protecting you from disappointment that I almost held you back from your destiny." Dad wrapped both of them in his arms. "I always knew your hands could see better than eyes, but today you showed everyone that your heart sees better than any computer." That evening, back in our hotel room, Camille finally had a chance to process what had happened. She sat on the bed, turning her first-place trophy over in her hands, still looking slightly stunned. "You know what the crazy part is?" she said to me. "I wasn't trying to prove I was better than anyone else. I was just trying to show that there's more than one way to understand engineering." The impact of what Camille accomplished that day extended far beyond the competition. Judge Patricia implemented new competition categories that celebrated different types of engineering excellence, not just the most expensive or technologically advanced solutions. Videos of Camille's blindfolded performance went viral, inspiring countless young engineers who had been told they didn't fit the traditional mold. But perhaps the most meaningful change happened at MIT itself. Dr. Chang invited Camille to speak at freshman orientation the following year about innovation, intuition, and the importance of truly understanding your machines rather than just programming them. Camille's approach became part of their curriculum, teaching students that the most sophisticated sensors in the world couldn't replace genuine mechanical intuition. 3 years later, Camille graduated from MIT with the highest honors in the program's history. She now works for NASA, designing robotic systems for space exploration, where her unique hands-on approach has revolutionized how engineers think about machine-human interfaces in extreme environments. But the lesson that stays with me most from that day isn't about robotics or engineering. It's about what happens when you refuse to let other people define your limitations. Camille didn't just defeat MIT's team while blindfolded. She proved that greatness isn't about having every advantage or the most expensive equipment. The most powerful tool in any engineer's toolkit, she told me that night, isn't perfect vision or unlimited funding. It's understanding. When you truly know your machine, when you felt every component and understood every connection, that's when real innovation happens. Today, whenever I face challenges that seem impossible, I remember my sister standing in that convention center, blindfolded and fearless, showing 300 people that the greatest limitations we face are usually the ones we accept without questioning. Camille taught everyone there that day that mastery isn't about having perfect conditions. It's about developing such deep understanding of your craft that you can succeed even when the odds are stacked against you.